So hello everybody, my name is Thomas. I'm the head custody at Sygnum. We are a fully licensed bank, but with an exclusive focus on digital assets. But today I don't want to talk about Sygnum, but I would like to talk about DeFi and traditional finance and how the two worlds might evolve. Will maybe one replace the other? So that's what I would like to explore today with you. So obviously DeFi has seen explosive growth over the last 1-2 years. At the beginning of last year, the total value locked, the TVL, stood at around $20 billion. Then at the end of last year, it sort of jumped to $250 billion. And today we stand at around $100 billion. Obviously, those are impressive numbers. We have seen really explosive growth. But if we compare that to traditional finance, where the market cap of the equity markets alone is around $100 trillion, it's clear that there is still really a lot of room for growth. So the question is really, so will DeFi just continue on that growth trajectory? Will basically DeFi coexist with traditional finance? Will maybe traditional finance just embrace DeFi? Or will maybe DeFi completely replace traditional finance? So that is the question. But maybe before we dig a little bit deeper, let's look at the opinions of some influential leaders that are working in sort of different corners of our industry. The first one on the left is Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank. And yeah, I'm sure many of you are aware she is quite against crypto. She basically says crypto is based on nothing. DeFi is worthless because it has no intrinsic value. And basically she thinks it will just go away again. Obviously, she is also not maybe entirely neutral because she is a big fan of central bank digital currency. The European Central Bank plans to launch their own sort of digital euro. So that's certainly one reason why maybe she is against crypto. Then the second person is Michael Su. He is a senior official in the US Treasury Department. So he basically says what is happening at the moment in DeFi very much reminds him of the financial crisis of 2008 or of the run-up to the financial crisis. As I'm sure many of you are aware, at the time, banks and other financial institutions, they were selling a lot of mortgage-backed securities and other very opaque financial instruments, and basically their value collapsed to more or less zero overnight. And this gentleman thinks the same will happen to DeFi. Basically, it will just collapse and will go away again. Then in the middle, we have Mark Cuban. He is like not exactly a crypto native person, but he's just a very successful entrepreneur and investor. And he takes a slightly different angle. He says banks obviously have been around for a long time, but they have not innovated, they have not automated, maybe because there was no pressure. They've become complacent, and basically he's saying that traditional finance is so stuck in their sort of legacy operations that they are just simply unable to compete with fintech or DeFi. Then the fourth person is, and now we are sort of entering the more crypto-friendly spectrum of people. So this gentleman is the CTO of Robinhood Crypto. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, Robinhood became famous because they sort of popularized the concept of zero fee stock trading, and they recently really went all in on crypto, and as it has been mentioned, announced, for example, a non-custodial wallet for crypto. And basically, he says that DeFi is creating a new kind of financial services system that works without intermediaries, and there is basically no place for sort of traditional institutions anymore. And then on the right, I'm sure many of you know him, CC. He's the founder and CEO of Binance, and his view is very simple. He basically thinks DeFi will replace traditional finance, and yeah, that's what's going to happen. But so obviously there are a lot of opinions out there, from basically DeFi is just a lot of hot air to, yeah, DeFi will replace traditional finance completely. And to dig a little bit deeper, let's remind ourselves about some of the underlying principles of DeFi and traditional finance. And the first one, obviously, is decentralization. Decentralized finance, the name says it already, has no intermediaries. Like if multiple parties want to transact, they can do so directly without intermediary. Maybe there's just an autonomous piece of code in between that sort of matches supply with demand, but there's no intermediaries that basically take or capture some of the value. Very different, of course, with traditional finance. It's all built on centralized systems. You have the banks that are an intermediary. You have systems like SWIFT or obviously also central banks. So you have a lot of central authorities that sort of control the system. Then composability. In decentralized finance, it's all programmable, at least if it runs on the same chain, like on an EVM chain or some other smart contract-enabled chain. There you can, for example, write a new piece of smart contract that takes, for example, takes out a flash loan in some place and maybe does a trade on a DEX or takes data from an oracle. And that's also why some people call DeFi money Lego, because you can basically mix and match existing pieces together to create completely new products. Of course, in traditional finance, it's quite different. Banks are sort of closed systems, even though the regulator is trying to push sort of open finance, but it hasn't really gone very far. Mostly in traditional finance, your account is not kind of programmable. You can't compose or multiple elements to create something new. Then transparency. Obviously, DeFi operates on public blockchains, where everything is public. You see the price or the fee that you pay, you see where the fee is going to, all the transactions, it's all public. In traditional finance, it all happens behind closed doors. For example, if you submit a loan application to a bank, a few days later you will get the result, but you have basically no idea based on what data this decision was taken, how they came up with the pricing, so you can just basically accept or not accept it, and that's it. And the last, but certainly not least important, is permissionless versus permissioned. One very important principle in DeFi is that it's permissionless. If you have an internet connection and a wallet, then you can interact with DeFi. Nobody can stop you from doing so. Whereas banking is permissioned. A bank may or may not take you as a client. Maybe they take you or not accept you based on your domicile. They may also terminate a relationship with you whenever they want. So it's basically permissioned, certainly not open for everybody. That begs a bit the question, so if we see that the principles on which traditional finance operate are so different to how DeFi works, the question is, does traditional finance really have, let's say, can they adapt to this new world of DeFi, or basically will just the same happen to them what happened to Kodak a few years ago? So I'm not sure how familiar you are still with Kodak, but they were basically the global market leader in analog photography. You could buy a Kodak film in almost every shop everywhere, and within a few years they have gone to absolute global market leader to more or less inexistent, because they were just unable to keep up and to develop the capabilities needed to compete in the new world of digital photography. And so the question is, will the same happen to traditional finance? So I think it will not happen to them in the same way. Of course, some traditional finance institutions will struggle to adapt. Some will maybe not make it. But I think there are a few reasons why some may basically embrace the new world of DeFi. And the first one is regulation. So regulation creates barriers of entry. So that is maybe not one of the intended consequences of regulation, but I think it's just a fact. Obviously, traditional finance institutions, they are much more used to deal with the regulator, whereas, for example, DeFi protocols, for them, it's quite a new thing to deal with regulators. So I think that is one element that will help traditional finance institutes to deal with the change. The second is customer loyalty. When you buy a new camera, maybe you don't care so much about the brand, but it's quite clear that in banking, customers are quite loyal, they are quite sticky. Especially in wealth management, you even have the case that sometimes the same bank serves multiple generations of the same family, and the bank basically remains when the wealth is handed over from one generation to the next. So that will certainly help traditional finance institutions to adapt. And the third one is user experience. And we have also seen that in the previous talk. I think it's quite clear that in terms of user experience, DeFi and also crypto to some extent still has a lot of room for improvement. And some fintechs, not so much banks, but some of them, yes, I think they have really managed to build very good user experiences, and that's something that I think will also help with the mass adoption of decentralized finance. So as we sort of continue the journey of decentralized finance towards hopefully much greater adoption still, so what is important or what needs to be taken care of for this to happen? And I think what I find extremely important and key to the sustainable success of DeFi is that we don't compromise sort of on the underlying principles that I've mentioned, things like decentralization, permissionlessness, and so on. And for example, already today we have a lot of DeFi protocols that call themselves DeFi, but in reality they are not decentralized at all. And the same goes also for open or being open or permissionless access. Like today, there is a tendency to basically start closing DeFi protocols that basically you need to be whitelisted by some kind of central authority in order to be able to access certain DeFi protocols, and often this is to make it more regulatory compliant, but I'm convinced that we can build fully decentralized, permissionless DeFi solutions even without compromising on sort of the core principles of DeFi. And so if there is one thing that I would like you to remember from my talk today, then it's really this, that we should make sure that as we go sort of towards greater adoption of DeFi, that we don't compromise on the core principles of DeFi, like permissionless or decentralization. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you so much.